Hi, I'm the Reverend Ann Dieterle, the rector of Calvary Episcopal Church, and this is the week 2 video for our Calvary One-Read using Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. This week we are covering chapters 3, 4, and 5, and in chapter 3, the emotions that are talked about go with places we go when things don't go as planned, which sounds just like a Tuesday to me, so maybe my plans are not made in the best vein, but we'll get to that when we talk about expectations. And expectations is one of the topics covered, which goes along with boredom, disappointment, regret, discouragement, resignation, and frustration. The discussions this week covered a lot of ground in and around those emotions, and I will share what I invite you to do is, as you go or consider these emotions, and if you're reading the book, is to think about ways that you're learning about yourself and about your own history, and also how this is helping you have insight into your interactions with other people. And so I'm going to do that in talking about both expectations and regret. And she talks in particular about unexamined and unexpressed expectations versus examined and expressed expectations, which seems to me to tie directly to to disappointment and frustration and regret as well. In terms of unexpressed and unexamined emotions, and this was true for me and came up at least in our discussions for one or two of our groups, is that we have this, maybe some of us have this hope that if we know someone well enough, that we won't have to express our expectations. And that has gotten me anyway into some trouble. It has certainly led to a bunch of disappointing experiences and encounters, as well as some regret. I've been using the example all week of the television show Modern Family, and Claire and Phil Dunphy, who've been married for a long time, and she's mad at him, and she thinks he should know why she's mad at him. And so in frustration, he just yells out at her, "Happy Val and birth anniversary," just assuming that he had forgotten one of those things. But that maybe it doesn't make so much sense to assume that somebody else is going to know how we're feeling, what we're expecting, and things like that. So, and she had a great example in the book about checking those expectations with her husband when she was packing for a trip to Disneyland and put 3 huge books in the suitcase. And he thought, what are you really expecting out of this trip? So expecting other people to read our minds is maybe not fair. And it's certainly setting us up for disappointment and possibly regret as well. Examined and expressed expectations doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get those met, but at least it gives us a starting point for negotiations if we're doing that beforehand, or maybe holding somebody accountable afterwards, maybe just holding ourselves accountable. She also talks about regret in the sense that most people, or that the research shows that in the short term, we regret bad outcomes when we took action, but in the long term, it's the actions that we did not take that really lead to regret. She says in particular, some of my own biggest regrets include failures of kindness, and failures included in that is failures of self-kindness. I thought that was really insightful in terms of what the difference between some short-term and long-term regrets might be, and that the idea of living without regrets probably means that we're not really examining our lives particularly closely. So again, that was places we go when things don't go as planned. And the next chapter, chapter 4, are places we go when it's beyond us. And she talks here about awe, wonder, confusion, curiosity, interest, and surprise. And here in particular, and maybe not surprisingly for someone who is a priest and a minister, awe and wonder in particular resonate with me in terms of what's important for our faith. And that awe is something that happens when we see something that doesn't fit with how we move through our everyday lives, how we understand that. And that awe inspires us to sit back and watch or look and just let the thing that is creating awe shine. Where wonder is like curiosity. It helps us to go and explore something further. So if we see something like a beautiful flower or butterfly, or a sunset, we may sit and simply watch. Whereas if we saw, and for me, I'll use the example of birds, where I'm really fascinated by birds and particularly shorebirds. And so I will go and find out things that I want to know about them, where their habitats are, when I'm likely to see them. And I'm particularly interested in bird calls at this point. So that's just a little bit to get to the difference between awe and wonder. She also talks about confusion. And one of the things that was surprising to me here was this sense that confusion is good to a degree. There's a term called optimal confusion because it inspires learning and inspires growth. All of these things have a degree of vulnerability. In fact, most of these emotions really do, in terms of exposing ourselves to not knowing everything or to having our worldview changed simply by letting other things in. The other thing that I thought was intriguing here was when she talked about awe and wonder, was that we experience something, especially with awe, that something that is larger than ourself, and maybe even largeness of ourself, largeness of itself. And that, maybe it's okay to feel small. And maybe it's okay. That happens with confusion as well. So that is a little bit about the places we go when it is beyond us. And then she finishes out with places we go when things aren't what they seem. Amusement, bitterness, nostalgia, cognitive dissonance, paradox, irony, and sarcasm. And here, again, these are things that resonate with me and also maybe help me understand where other people are coming from. One of the things we talked a little bit about bittersweetness in our groups. We talked about the capacity to feel sadness and joy at the same time. And then also that nostalgia, this was the surprising part, that nostalgia isn't exactly a positive, or at least not exclusively a positive. And particularly defining it as a yearning for the way that things used to be and our often idealized and self-protective version of the past. So when you experience nostalgia, it might help to reality check what you're really remembering. Our brains, I've noticed this, we have in our family, and when my father passed away, my mother and I have a very different recollection of how one day in particular happened. And clearly, at least one of us is wrong, at least, and maybe both of us. But that this sense of, and I'm not sure that this is really nostalgia, but that it is about how our memories maybe can trick us, especially maybe when we're under duress. But it may be worth reality checking your nostalgia, because it may be that you are remembering something that didn't happen exactly the way it did in your mind, or that it didn't happen for you in the same way it happened for other people. So again, nostalgia, not inherently a bad thing, but also not inherently a positive thing either. Cognitive dissonance being something that is a state of tension that occurs when a person holds two cognitions that are psychologically inconsistent with each other. So smoking might harm me, but not me, because I'm only smoking 3 packs a day instead of 5, like that other person or those people who are actually dying from lung cancer. I picked that example because it was close to the one in the book. But you get the idea that when we are confronted with information that doesn't fit our normal worldview, when things aren't what they seem or what we think it seems like, we have the choice to open ourselves, our minds up, and let new information in and let that work on us, and how that may make life different for us. Or we can shut down, double down on our old beliefs, even though we seem to have some new experience, maybe some new knowledge that didn't fit with our old way of knowing. And then one last thing that I'll hit on, well, maybe 2 last things. One is, as far as paradox is concerned, she quotes Carl Jung, who says, "The paradox is one of our most valuable spiritual possessions. Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. We are in the season of Lent, and Jesus, we know, will die on the cross, and then we will proclaim that he is risen. Those two things do not generally go together. And so I think when he talks about being a valuable spiritual possession, that's an example of one of those things that helps us to know something spiritually that we might not be able to know just by our logical minds. Okay, now I'm really finally going to stop, but not before mentioning irony and sarcasm. And particularly that irony and sarcasm are great if you know the people who you're talking to and if you use it wisely. We have an expression you probably know, people who can dish it out, but also who can take it. It's important to know, are you talking to someone who appreciates that type of humor? And I think sometimes we use that expression as, well, you can't take it, you can't dish it out, as maybe a judgment on them, but maybe it's just not their sense of humor. And it definitely does not come across, again, except in maybe those rare instances when you know someone very, very well, but it does not come across in email or in text or in other kinds of written communication if you're talking to someone specifically about something in real time. So myself have had sarcasm go very bad in an email, and I don't do it anymore. So if you have to put it in parentheses and say you're being sarcastic, maybe it's best to just leave it alone. The Holy Spirit has now started intervening and just say, you know what, just delete that particular line. So that covers chapters 3, 4, and 5, or at least some of the things that were highlights for me. And again, they might not be highlights for you if you've had the chance to read them, but I invite you to think about how it touches you spiritually, but think about how it helps you, and think about how it helps you to understand yourself, and how maybe it's impacting how you are having empathy for others. Thanks so much for watching. If you've made it this far, God bless you and have a good week. Bye-bye.